Welcome to episode 7 of Reading to Mom. My name is Joe, the publisher at Historia Research Press in Chicago, Illinois. As the COVID-19 pandemic drags on, so do the readings by one of our authors to his mother. As we learned in the last episode, the author is by no means a voice actor. Fortunately, we did stumble upon a rather skillful reader to play Sidra's role. So in the upcoming chapter, we have done as much as we can to give her lines. We hope this will in some way improve these readings and allow those of you foolish enough to tune in to enjoy this fantasy world. Hi, Mom, and happy Mother's Day. Well, it's been a couple of weeks since the last episode, and as you can see, I had an opportunity to pursue essential work. I hadn't really given much thought to the difference between essential workers and inessential workers until recently, but I have to say I was a little disturbed to see that my publisher has adopted or imitated my hairstyle in recent weeks. I personally can't think of anything less essential than my publisher, so I really don't understand what he intends to gain by the change in his appearance. That's enough about the inessential work of publishing. If you recall, the Chapter 5, Episode 6 introduced Sidra to her new companions on her first foray into the Lyman to discover the Koboloi lair and confront the Koboloi about the disappearance of the merchant. The narrative picks up where the last chapter left off, a sneak attack by a Koboloi, and introduces us to Sidra's first reaction with an encounter of one of the cultures in the Lyman. This chapter concludes a series of 3 that introduces Sidra and her reaction to her new life in the West. As we have seen, she has brought certain prejudices of Eastern ways and has reacted poorly in some cases to the peoples, the thieves of the Acropolis, and it's true of her encounter with the Koboloi. One other element, though, that you may pick up on is that she's beginning to embrace her new companions and admires the ferocity of Rajana when she takes wolf form, and at one point refers to Matna as her champion, indicating an acceptance of the great Knoll's capabilities. Chapter 6, Untrue Hospitality. Keeping her wits about her in the unforeseen confusion of the Koboloi surprise assault, Sidra put her trust in Matna's ability to scent the attackers. Sprinting behind the loping Knoll, Sidra grasped the hilt of her Morning Star, a mace-like weapon with a spiked iron globe attached to the end of the shaft, and yanked it from the clasp of her belt. She scanned the forest floor and the low perches of the trees to spot one of her attackers. Just as Bajana scampered past, 2 more bolts whizzed through the air from behind a fallen log, giving Sidra the opportunity to catch the sight of the Koboloi. Immediately, she broke off her sprint and tossed her weapon to the ground in front of her.
I am an envoy from the Acropolis sent to negotiate with your clan. I request the right to hospitality for a public guest.
She called out to her foes. During the Arcane Age, Insitia, or the right to hospitality for a public guest, developed into an informal custom among the peoples of the Provenance, and much later, the Lyman. In its most basic form, Insitia simply guaranteed that every citizen of the Provenance had the liberty to move freely between the 6 cities. Originally, the citizens of Naxos and Panoptes introduced the diplomatic courtesy to accommodate traffic in the many political and commercial affairs that the 2 cities shared for the Provenance. Following the Glorious Revolution and the collapse of the preternatural age social order, The historical record indicates that the most immediate benefit of Insitia is that the custom facilitated the internal migration of citizens. Provenantial cities may not refuse admittance to unwelcome political leaders or commercial agents from any of the other cities, whereas none of the local governments adopted formal laws to govern the movement of peoples into the city walls. The right to hospitality proved an efficient means to avoid conflicts between the sister cities. If such a bar against particular citizens had been possible, permitting one city to reject a citizen of another city, the offended city most assuredly would have retaliated with an expulsion or refusal of admittance in kind. In those conditions, the situation easily may have escalated to a point where two cities refused to admit each other's citizens. Footnote 1. A few recent scholars now suggest that Insitia came to reflect something more profound about the provenance and the way of life that its peoples wished to establish for the future. For a primer on the debate between traditionalists and the revisionist historians, see Herman L. Bigarre, Insitia and the Provenantial City, a PhD dissertation at the Weathermark Center for Rumination on the Classical Powers, published in 883, of the Golden Age. And footnote. Over the centuries that followed, the custom grew to encompass each of the recovered cities, Pallene, Libua, Alcyoneus, and Agrinio. Moreover, hospitality came to include all the citizens of the province. The cities first accorded the privilege to the political leaders of the councils, but the right to hospitality eventually extended to include all travelers between the cities. In large part, the recovery of the cities of the province, followed by the settlement of a new population of arcanists, mechanic artists, and merchants, drove the expansion of this right to include all citizens regardless of stature or arcane ability. In order to revivify the social and economic life of the preternatural cities, the leading citizens of the West pressed for free access to the established masters of Naxos and Panoptes. Liberal laws also created lucrative economic conditions in an effort to convince established members of the three interests to relocate their affairs to a western metropolis. Initially, the eastern cities rejected the requests of the western cities. The councils passed laws that forbade masters of the three interests to immigrate from their cities and carry away their classical craft or merchant knowledge. Not long thereafter, however, the councils reversed themselves when the wisest policy came to see the western province as a much-needed safety valve for the overcrowded populations of Urbane, Panoptes, and Naxos. Footnote 2. There is, of course, a bit more to the story. While the classical and craft masters of the province observed the laws of the council, the western cities soon found that they easily enticed apprentices, even before they fulfilled their contracts, to flee to Pallene and Libua to establish their own enterprises. The most successful of these apprentices, a promising young magician who chose to become a wealthy mechanic artist, started his own scroll-making practice in Pallene. He later wrote a short account of his life that influenced many more apprentices to cut short their tutelage and head west in search of their own fortunes. See Benevolus, 13 Virtues, published in Pallene in the Third Epoch, 7th period of the Arcane Age. A few millenniums later, B. Franklin, published an English translation in Philadelphia, 491 of the Golden Age, that remains readily available from libraries and used booksellers. End footnote. In the more recent Arcane Age epochs, the significant point for our history, mercantile cartels brought the tradition to the peoples of the Lyman in their ventures to establish new trading networks. Not all cultures of the Lyman accepted the propositions of the mercantile cartels, but those that did came to respect and rely on the right to hospitality. The custom allowed the cultures of the Lyman to move freely across the ambiguous borders of the province, to chase after game or to visit the sacred grounds of their ancestors. In the territory surrounding the Acropolis, after centuries of contact, the trade between local clans and the mercantile cartels firmly entrenched the custom, as well as carried the common tongue, or the commercial bent, of the province to the Lyman. By the time the councils passed legislation and sent resources to erect the Acropolis along the West Lyman, the mercantile cartels of Agrinio had already established prolific trading networks with the peoples surrounding Eurynome. Nevertheless, not all outsiders won their appeal to hospitality with the unpredictable peoples of the Lyman. Footnote 3. To the mortal peril of the merchants. In modern times, we simply no longer have a sense of the risk that business persons took to make a life for themselves. In a sense, we know risk in business as the potential increase or decrease of an investment value. Our world reduces risk to an abstraction for the amusement of calculatingly dismal scientists and their algorithms. Likewise, in our great business schools, we celebrate the sages of high finance, who risk nothing more than the ire of unionized custodial staff in order to create a personally profitable partnership with the state. In contrast, in the early Provenance, the merchants didn't play lots like decadent, self-indulgent children with notes of paper or tiny pixels on a monitor. The merchants invested and risked their lives. End footnote. Nevertheless, not all outsiders won their appeal to hospitality with the unpredictable peoples of the Lyman. To make matters worse, even the slightest omission of etiquette that the host took as a show of disrespect or a lack of deference could result in a re-engagement of hostilities. With these thoughts present to mind, Sidra.
I fixed my eyes on the log, no more than 23 strides away, uncertain that the creatures would honor the entreaty.
Matna and Brajana, recognizing Sidra's act of diplomacy, dove behind two trees to shield themselves from further attack. She also spotted Kivan, who somehow had mounted the tree directly behind the fallen logs, his bow trained on a foe she couldn't see for herself. As Sidra stood her ground, an enemy behind the log in front of her sprang to its feet to deliver another shot from its small crossbow. With a bead on Sidra, the creature squeezed the trigger of the crossbow. She stood motionless, her hands empty, undefended. At that moment, a raspy call echoed through the woods. Her assailant jerked its arm just as it pulled the trigger, sending the bolt harmlessly into the branches high above. The leader of this group of kobold heeded the cleric's call for hospitality. To the diplomatic party's misfortune, however, the damnable rogue slipped out of the bushes alongside the crossbowman to slip her dagger deep into the vulnerable crossbowman's back. Sidra later questioned the rogue's motives in her journal.
I will never know if Eosh intended to violate the custom and use the request for hospitality as an opportunity to sneak an attack, or if she sincerely sought to defend the party.
Nevertheless, without regard for the fact that the melee might break out anew, she rushed to the side of the dying creature, summoning an appropriate healing spell. Footnote 4. On this event, the recovered papers of the dynasties of the Acropolis provide some insight into the judgment of Sidra's companions. In his reports on the activities of Sidra during her time in the Acropolis, the account of her first assignment includes this scathing appraisal of her actions outside the lair of the Koboloi. The immature cleric recklessly wasted her healing powers and failed to recognize that the party needed her to preserve all of her spells for her companions in combat. It's not clear who shared this judgment with the dynasties, or if the dynasties came to this conclusion alone. See the collected records of the dynasties of the Acropolis, collected in the Acropolis, in the 11th epoch between the 5th and 7th periods of the Arcane Age. End footnote. Nevertheless, without regard for the fact that the melee might break out anew, she rushed to the side of the dying creature, summoning an appropriate healing spell. The little reptilian man immediately roused, scrambling past the legs of the rogue, and darted into the forest in the direction of the kobold leader. Sidra called out, apologized for the folly of her companions, reissued her request for hospitality, while removing the unloaded crossbow from her back to throw on the ground as a symbolic gesture. The ploy worked. Koboloi is the original designation for the Gothic creatures we now call kobolds. Originally meaning impudent rogues, kobolds earned their name due to their frequent mastery of the rogue class. A culture that valued trickery and misconduct above all other values. The name also translates inaccurately as puckish goblins. A related name, less known to the modern world, Ascalobuktes, more precisely described the individual appearance of the koboloi, the spotted lizard man. Covered in mottled reptilian scales, the kobolds' long tails and snouts show clearly their reptilian ancestry. Only 2 cubits tall, kobolds walked erect, like other humanoids, on feet with long aquiline toes that look more like a second pair of hands. In their oversized hooked fingers, the koboloi rogue preferred to wield a short hooked blade called a kropion, or billhook, and an undersized crossbow that delivered only half the force of the regular-sized ranged weapons. Understanding fully the disadvantages of their size and brute force, the kobolds often used their roguish skills to launch a surprise attack in large numbers, ranging from 11 to 17, in order to gain an edge over their intended victims. Footnote 5. The description of kobolds is taken from a text by Tigris entitled The Demotic Liman, published in Agrinio in the 9th epoch, 2nd period of the Arcane Age, stanza 19. End footnote. In this instance, the leader of the kobold led 10 of his fellow guards from the bushes to greet the diplomats. Sidra stepped forward to greet her counterpart when the captain barked orders to her underlings. Grab our guests' weapons, lingering over her enunciation of the letter S at the front of her protruding jaw and tongue. Turning to Sidra, she continued, We gladly welcome the envoys of the Acropolis. Tell us, what is its name?
I am Sidra. I request a consultation with your great masters on behalf of the dynasties of the Acropolis to discuss recent assaults on the caravans of our merchants.
As you wish, the kobold captain hissed. I am called Sorote. Command your companions to observe our grace. Sidra obliged the kobold captain, motioning to her crew to sheathe all weapons. In accordance with Insitia and the customs of hospitality, the companions of a public guest held their weapons provided they sheathed them while in the presence of the host. Behind the appearances of the custom, the public guests in fact surrendered to the host, who in most circumstances outnumbered the guests immensely. The laying down of weapons by the public guests merely signified the need for mercy from the host during the parley or negotiations. In this respect, if a host demanded that the guest companions also remove their weapons, it betrayed the host's intentions for treachery. Footnote 6. The history behind this practice is in fact quite dreadful. Early in the Arcane Age, when the Provenance sought to reclaim Paline, the councils sided with the dwarves against orcs in the Ferris Mountains. At that time, the rules of hospitality were still unformed, and the host often demanded that all weapons be surrendered by public guests. At the conclusion of this conflict, the tribes of the orcs came to Paline to negotiate terms of peace with the Provenance and presented themselves as public guests to the dwarven guards of Paline. The dwarves, certain that orcs planned some treachery, demanded that the emissaries and their guards relinquish all weapons. The guards then led the orcs, who numbered 107, to the Great Hall of Paline. Once there, to the horror of the council members of the Provenance, the dwarf leader, Jorgos, meaning earthworker in the language of the dwarves, demanded that the chieftains of the orcs be tried for their crimes of killing dwarf miners. Summarily judged guilty, Jorgos ordered 7 orc chieftains to death by hanging. Jorgos then claimed 29 children as hostages and ordered the remaining orcs to gather their peoples and to seek refuge in the West Liman, a largely uninhabited, deadly territory during the early Arcane Age. Utterly demoralized by the dwarves' dishonorable actions, the orcs of the men relocated from the Ferris Mountains to the Orphean Mountains, but only after months of hellish marching across the untamed Central Plains. So it came to be, as well, that the companions of public guests never surrendered their weapons. Chapter 10 offers a more detailed description of the events. End footnote. In this respect, if a host demanded that their guest companions also remove their weapons, it betrayed the host's intentions for treachery. Thus, armed companions signified that both sides intended to honor the rituals and generosity of hospitality. To Oron's credit, the members of Sidra's diplomatic party knew well the protocols of Insitia. With the exception of Eosh's offense, her companions conducted themselves with dignity. Kivan descended from the trees behind the kobold, giving the diminutive lizard men a fright. Then the members of Sidra's party fell in behind her, their weapons safely inserted to the hilt in their sheaths with respect for the hosts. For 2 leagues, Sorote guided the group through the wilderness in the dusk. until the forest gave way to a glen adjacent to a small lake, both nestled between the gentle slopes of a triad of small peaks at the southern end of the Orphean mountain range. As the darkness of the night crept over the landscape, the kobolds led the group around the water toward the center peak of the elevations. Although Sidra had difficulty adjusting to the dim light, Kivan whispered to her in Elvish to let her know that he believed the kobolds led the party along a winding, well-worn trail that ascended to the summit of the center peak. "Keep your eyes fixed on the ground beneath your feet, and you will be safe," he advised. After covering another league up the side of the small mountain, short of the summit, the path ended to reveal a rocky plateau beneath craggy bluffs and a narrow opening like the cracked shell of an egg. Though the entrance was barely 4 cubits tall, forcing Matna to duck on his way in the interior of the cave the ceiling hung about 7 to 9 cubits above the ground. Plenty of space when Matna needed to use a stirrox, Sidra observed in her journal. Sorote confided in the leader of the guards stationed at the entrance. After a brief conference, she turned to Sidra to inform her that the masters of the kobolds received no guests before the midnight hour. In the meantime, the leaders ordered the captain to accompany the Acropolitan diplomats to the Gulp Hall, where the clan would serve a hearty feast in honor of their guests. "As a public guest," Sorote confided, "we shall choke the hunger from you and your companions, so that it will not be said that the kobolds slight visitors from the Acropolis."
Even before witnessing the banquet, my stomach turned at the thought of consuming the foodstuffs of the kobold.
Sidra later noted to herself. To her host, however, Sidra confessed that she had not anticipated such an honor, and thanked Sorote effusively. Footnote 7. In truth, the kobolds' fete and Sidra's gratitude observed the customs of the Insitia in the west. Public feasts were not part of the Insitia in the early Provenance or the eastern cities, for in fact the number of travelers made such displays prohibitively expensive. The Lyman contributed this practical feature to Insitia. Most of the peoples of the Lyman insisted that their public guests eat before negotiating prices or conducting diplomacy in accordance with a traditional saying, shared among many Lyman cultures: "Feed and protect the wandering guest that is sacred to the sun and moon." Despite the graciousness of their hosts, most diplomats and merchants of the Acropolis believed that the custom had more to do with the border tribes' desires to gain an edge in the ensuing negotiations. While the kobolds offered no fermented libations, many tribes insisted that their guests drink their own spirits without temperance before meeting with their sober leaders. End footnote. As Sidra suspected, the Gulp Hall exhibited an audible din testifying to the eating habits of the kobolds. At the end of the main hall, about several hundred strides into the mountain, a capacious cavern opened in the shape of a semicircular dome. At the back center of the space, a huge furnace burned, consuming the precious mineral mined by the community: coal. Like lizards, the kobolds required heat to increase their metabolism and digest food. As humanoids, however, the little people preferred natural protection from predators or other humanoids in cavernous shelters and sturdy encampments. The kobolds negotiated the tension between their two lineages, becoming the first peoples of the domain to mine and harness the properties of the fiery mineral dear to the Metal Age, bituminous coal. The lizard people's great banquet halls, the few described in song or private records in any case, always featured massive fireplaces with flues that extended through the ceiling up to the surface of the mountain peak. In her case, Sidra recalled,
As we entered, between carts loaded with barrels and cages of small animals along the entrance, the Gulp Hole sweltered from the heat of the furnace near to the back wall.
Along a raised ridge surrounding the fire, many kobolds lay belly up, soaking in the warmth of the furnace to metabolize their dinners. At the center of the room, a long stone table, roughly 29 cubits in length, 1.5 cubits above the floor, divided the semicircular hall at the center. A channel, about half a cubit deep, extended from end to end in the center of the table. Small gutters, like paths of a maze, ran along the edge of the table where the kobolds stood to feast. As Sidra approached,
2 kobolds carried a long basket up to the table's edge, then tipped it over, unloading a variety of small rodents, squirrels, and jackrabbits, all living creatures, into the center pit.
No sooner had the basket carriers withdrawn, the feasting commenced. As the game wildly scrambled for dear life, leaping over and dashing under each other down the long trench, the adults leaned over the table to grasp the living and panting dinners. Sidra watched as the kobolds jammed their meals deep into their mouths and then swallowed whole their uncooked, unflayed, and quivering meals. Larger kobolds, presumably parents, grabbed the smallest rodents to drop into the narrow gutters near the edge of the table. The young cowboy, who tended to play with the food scampering down the gutters before eventually seizing a prey, followed the example of the parents. "Come, Sorote," urged Sidra. "Let us feast," salivating over the final S in her invitation. While the Eastern cleric hesitated, uncertain what to do, Matna rushed forward to snatch the 2 last jackrabbits from the center channel. He snapped the game's necks while turning to Sidra. "Follow me. I will roast us hares." Kivon tapped her shoulder, nodded to her to indicate that she should follow the assertive half-beast of the West Lineman. Near the furnace, Matna grabbed 2 long hardwood spits. The barbarian pulled a long knife from his belt, skinned the hares over a small basin, and staked the meals to the spit. Pulling a small pouch from his belt, Matna dressed the hares as he shared another barbarian secret with Sidra. "Always salt. A free meal." Matna then stepped over the cowboy, who napped along the elevation surrounding the fire pit, and inserted the base of the spits into holes chipped into the stone floor for just this purpose. The seasoned wild does hung from the spit near the heat of the fire to cook. Sidra had not noticed the cooking utensils and basin set aside for guests in her initial survey of the hall.
Only after Matna sat back to let the rabbits simmer, I relaxed enough to enjoy the fresh victuals offered by my hosts.
Sidra recalled. The first wave of kobold hungrily devoured their dinners before the party's meat cooked on the spits near the fire. Bajana, who never ate meat, skipped the entire ordeal and replenished with a few handfuls of dried legumes and mushrooms that she carried with her. Patiently, the little lizard clan waited for the guests to finish cooking. Sidra, self-consciously, daintily ate the cooked hare in bite-sized portions. As soon as the guests swallowed the final morsel of their meals, the servers once again leaped into action to serve the whole body of diners the dessert. Large bowls full of grasshoppers and crickets. As the adults shoveled handfuls of the insects into their cheeks, the young kobolds chased the strays that escaped the insatiable horde surrounding the table. Kivon again nudged Sidra, indicating that she must partake of the dessert as served. In encouragement, he reached forward, sifted a few out of the bowl, and popped them into his mouth. With a slight bow to Sorote, Sidra followed Kivon's lead, grabbed a handful of scattering bugs, and munched on a few of the juicy, crispy delights. When the feast concluded,
I scraped the roof of my mouth with my tongue to erase the memory of the tiny bits of insect ground between my teeth. It then dawned on me that a large throng of koboloi had gradually perched themselves on the stone knoll surrounding the fire. Oron's surveillance was wrong. Nearly the full complement of pot-bellied koboloi remained in the lair.
Footnote 9. On this point, Oron defended himself to the dynasties, insisting that druid messengers who flew from a mining camp called Still Pond to the west of the Acropolis witnessed the troop movement of the kobolds. He accused Sidra of misrepresenting the size of the clan, an Easterner who did not know the difference between the rogues and the caretakers of the kobold, from the collected records of the dynasties of the Acropolis. In hindsight, it is possible that Sidra failed to discern the difference between the rogues and non-rogues among the koboloi. To the modern eye, this may be difficult to understand, since one could not distinguish between arcanists and commoners simply in reference to gender, countenance, or dress during the Arcane Age. Women and men fought alongside each other in battle. Other men and women cared together for the collective or the young. The classical powers demonstrated no prejudice for gender, and most peoples of the domain constructed societies around practices that cultivated the greatest number of arcanists. To discern which individuals were and which individuals were not the arcanists of the kobold clan, Sidra quite possibly needed more experience and knowledge than she possessed at that time. Furthermore, she makes no reference to a conversation with Kievan or Brajana on that matter. End footnote. In the banquet hall, without sight of the night sky, Sidra had no way to measure the periods of the day. The cleric and her companions passed the time in idle conversation while watching the kobold children playing juvenile roguish tricks upon one another. After a time, Sorote arose from her resting place beside the fire pit and excused herself so that she may make preparations for the guests to meet with the masters of the kobolds. The petite host disappeared through a passageway on the right side of the ark into the banquet hall, guarded by two kobolds who had not participated in the gulping. Not much later, Sarot returned and urged Sidra to gather her companions. The red drake has reignited the skyfire in the darkness beneath the domain. Come, our master bids you to speak. Footnote 10. Sidra recorded the line as if spoken by Sorote. Interestingly, then, the creature references the red dragon of Tityos, whose final resting place was beyond the eastern horizon, according to Sime's epic poem, The Ends of the Gods, discussed in Chapter 3. These kobolds seem to know the mythology of the dragons, and likewise attributed the rebirth of the sun each morning to the Empyrean red beast. End footnote. Sorote led the diplomats down the passage on the right side of the banquet hall. About one-third the distance of the main hall, the passageway opened into another large chamber, triangular in shape, but nearly the same size. To the left, the corner of the triangular room had a small furnace and dining area. To the right, in the other corner, sacks, barrels, two chests, and other sundries of the kobold's treasures were packed. On each side of the passage, through which they entered, a kobold with crossbow stood guard. Along each wall, extending from the far corner, 5 guards armed with short spears protected the masters of the koboloi.
In the back corner of the room, directly across from the passage, stood 2 regal, lizard-like humanoids on a low dais, both dressed in leathery garb, dappled in black and shades of indigo, with small headpieces set with uncut gems to indicate their leadership of the kobold. 1 male, 1 female, each wore a Cropion knife loosely attached to a leather belt.
To the left of the 2 masters, the traditional position for trusted advisors, an orc leaned on the hilt of his great axe, upside down, with the blade end near the floor. Shocked by the presence of the orc, Sidra made note of the unexpected ambassador. She proved unable to discern the features that made every orc face unique, providing only a general description of him.
Over 4 cubits tall, pug-nosed, with a bushy beard and hair that was not braided, with the exception of a single cord that ran the length of his back and dangled like a tail between the back thighs of his legs.
She then noticed that the orc and the 2 kobold chiefs wrapped dark purple sashes around their waists. Sorote led the entourage forward until they stood about a handful of strides from the kobold leaders, directly between the 2 sets of guards. The captain, Sidra's host since the first encounter in the woods, set her morning star and crossbow on the ground before the masters of the clan. Sorote then presented her to the 2 chieftains. Lords, Urgiza, and Ktoyo, I give you Sidra, envoy of the Acropolis, our public guest. At that, she bowed to Sidra and left the room. Lord Ktoyo, the female chieftain, then spoke with a sharp tongue. Why do the Alapistons, false scales, request an audience with us? She demanded, using the kobold's jeering disparagement for the common mercenaries of the Acropolis, who often adorned themselves in metal, the false armor. Although taken aback by the abruptness of the chieftain's question in reference to the dissembling Acropolitans, Sidra remained mindful of the etiquette a guest must show her hosts. She began.
I wish first to thank you for your hospitality. I assure you that my words are not corrupted by hunger or thirst.
Both chieftains slightly nodded their heads, indicating their appreciation for her gratitude. She then grabbed a piece of parchment from beneath her belt. She announced, while unrolling the scroll,
I bring you a message from the dynasties of the Acropolis. Lords Urgiza and Kateo, the Provenance honors the way of the Lyman, including the Koboloi right to foray and to plunder in battle. Our goods are only as valuable as the defenses we employ to guard them. Our people, however, like your people, are free. We do not take Koboloi captive, and until now, Koboloi have not taken our people captive. I bid you to release the merchant you kidnapped during a recent attack on a caravan, so that we may trade and loot with honor. It is in our mutual interest to maintain the long peace that we have cultivated between our two peoples.
Footnote 11. Oron's instructions to Sidra to read the message to the kobolds must have been recorded on the lost pages of her journal. No other mention of the letter is found in her records, or those of the Acropolis. Notably, though, the message communicates the code of ethics that existed between several cultures of the Lyman and the Acropolis. Both sides seem to honor the right of raiding parties and adventurers to seize goods and property. The governments, such as they were, did not interfere in the protection of property to the great benefit of a single class of people. Persons, however, were in a certain respect untouchable. Both sides frowned upon kidnappings and non-combat kills. Murder, as we understand the term in the modern world, had no direct equivalent in the Arcane Age, since everyday life on the Lyman frequently witnessed small skirmishes and death. End footnote. The two masters of the Koboloi conferred with each other for a moment to discuss the message of the dynasties. As they did so, Sidra noticed the guards along the walls glancing at each other as if confused by the request. The orc yawned, shifting slightly to take some of the weight off the axe he leaned on. Behind her, just as the orc moved, Sidra heard a barely audible growl from Matna. She glanced back to see him clutching the stir-axe, still safely clasped to his belt. Kivon distracted himself as he rooted around in his satchel for something. Rajana, for some reason, hunched over slightly. Envoy, Argiza angrily responded. The Acropolis sent you here to spread untruths and to make false accusations. Our people have kidnapped no merchant of the Provenance. Why do the false scales give us false accusations in return for true hospitality? The denial startled Sidra. She realized she had no answer for the kobold leaders. All of her information came from Oron. Until that moment, the message of the dynasties never seemed in doubt. She immediately saw that she had only two options. Either she pressed the matter to the kobold leaders, further accusing them of hiding their misdeeds by refusing to release the merchant, or she accepted the word of the leaders, fully acknowledging that their people had nothing to do with the missing merchant. On the one hand, it seemed unlikely that the information provided by Oron and the dynasties erred. How would local mercenaries not know the difference between Koboloi and other communities in the Lyman? On the other hand, according to the customs of Ansitia, the kobold masters justly desired repayment for their hospitality.
I considered the throng of kobolds resting in the gulp hall between the chieftain's chamber and the cave entrance before deciding to express regret for the misunderstanding.
Her decision, though, seemed too long in the making, for at that moment the orc unleashed mayhem on the two parties.
The orc dashed at me, sweeping his great axe up from his right side in both hands like a Libuan scythe, swinging the axe head in one full arc over his head before the blade rushed down at me with the full force of his muscles. His death lunge surprised me. Misjudging the orc's point of attack when the blade rose over his head, I ducked as if he planned to go for my neck. But as he bore down upon me in 3 short bounds, the blade swept downward in a motion that slashed at the ether in front of my midriff. Before I had recognized my fatal mistake, my companions had already met the surprise assault. Matna, who seemed to smell the deception, anticipated the swift aggression. My champion leaped in front of me with his stir-axe in position to block the blow of the orc. The alertness and strength of the Mixlin forced the orc's blade to glance off my leg, producing only a minor wound. Kivon, who apparently had not been distracted but had searched for an item from his bag, chanted several words, unknown to me, while tossing a handful of dust from his pouch in the direction of the passage to the banquet hall. Rajana quickly morphed into a wolf form and leaped at the throat of one of the guards standing along the wall. For her part, Eosh spun around to let loose an arrow that fell one of the two Koboloi guards near the entry as she sprinted to the passage to engage the second sentry. The Koboloi leaders and guards seemed just as surprised as I was by the orc's actions.
Nonetheless, the hosts outnumber the guests by 2 to 1 in the chamber, and Sidra's weapons lay on the ground between the orc and the masters of the Koboloi. While Rajana throttled one of the grounds on the right side of the room, the 4 others advanced on the druid wolf, thrusting their spears in an effort to pierce her hide.
The 5 guards to the left circled around Kevon to surround us from behind. The 2 chieftains, who were visibly shaken by the sudden outburst of combat, darted behind the guards to the left to escape toward the passage.
The orc barbarian, forced to cut off his offensive against Sidra, single-handedly engaged Matna. Sidra, unarmed and positioned between 3 of her companions, danced around in the midst of the melee, trying to determine who may need her aid.
Near the passage into the chamber, I saw Eosh handily dispatch the second sentry and disappear in the darkness of the hall. Brajana, despite several spear wounds to her sides and chest, upended and tore out the throats of 2 other guards to her right side. Kevon dodged the spear thrusts of his enemies, that effectively countered with his 2 swords to take down another of the combatants. When Matna rushed in front of me to block the powerful blow of the orc, he lost his balance and exposed himself to a vicious counterattack by the orc. The brute exploited his opportunity, knocking Matna to the ground and thrust the point of his axe into Matna's shoulder. Only after deflecting a second attack of opportunity by the orc did Matna regain his feet. Regardless, the damage to his shoulder limited the swiftness of his blows with the Styrax, giving the orc a defensive advantage. The clang of the axes wielded by the 2 great barbarians as they blocked each other's strikes resonated throughout the chamber, a deafening alarm for the entire tribe of Koboloi in the cavern. I determined that if we were to have any chance, I needed to heal Matna and silence the voice of strife resounding throughout the chieftain's chambers. I had learned my lesson on the Wayfarer's Trail, so I called out to Kevon to protect my back before moving. Fortunately, Matna held his ground between me and the orc and keeping my injured mate within reach. After I conjured the healing power, I placed my outstretched hand on Matna's back for a mere instant. The ball of darkness from the wound gathered in the palm of my hand before dissipating into the ether.
Footnote 12. This is one of the few remaining descriptions for the visual imagery of the classical power of healing. Most sources that have survived into the Golden Age merely mention the casting of a spell without providing any description of the visual phenomena that accompanied it. While certain spells, especially those of wizards, such as magic missiles and fireballs, possess names that designated and describe the physical phenomena, most spell names offer few clues for the mind's eye of the modern reader. In the case of healing, what did a cure spell look like? As with Sidra's writings here, the few allusions to the visual phenomena of healing spells refer to clouds or balls of darkness that formed from the injuries and sicknesses of the patient's bodies. What this darkness is, why it is attracted by the hands of clerics, and how it is dissipated, returning the patient to full health, are entirely unknown to modern medicine. End footnote.
Immediately, Matna rejuvenated well enough to overpower the orc in short order, forcing the would-be assassin toward the dais. Given my chance, I seized my morning star from the stone floor. When I erected myself, weapon in hand, Matna delivered an awesome strike, the most powerful blow I had ever witnessed, as he buried the head of his Styrax deep beneath the chest armor of the duplicitous orc. I turned to fight the remaining guards, seeing Kevon injured but managing himself against his last opponent. Brajana was not so fortunate. The Koboloi seriously hobbled her during the conflict, and the druid wolf limped on 3 legs, crouched in a defensive posture to evade the sting of the spear held by the last remaining guard from her side of the triangular cavern. I ran to Brajana's aid, catching the Koboloi by surprise. My morning star landed squarely on the head of our final foe, crushing the unfortunate creature's skull. The first time I ever took a life from the Lyman. At that moment, Eosh reemerged from the darkness of the hallway with a slain chieftain in each hand.
Footnote 13. Privately, in her journal, Sidra noted to herself that she neglected to account for the 2 chieftains during the melee. Eosh's quick thinking secured the passageway and possibly saved our entire group that day. In her report to the dynasties, Sidra made no such admission, nor offered any praise for the rogue. End footnote. Eosh approached the others, tossed the lifeless bodies to the ground, and called out to Kevon. How much longer? About 67 heartbeats. Plenty, the rogue responded. Rajana, guard the passageway. Kivan, search the guards and Oric for valuables. Matna, you break open the footlocker in the corner. Sidra, you can search the chieftains while I take the chest, the trapped chest. Each of Sidra's companions promptly heeded Eosh as she issued orders to the group, except Sidra, who balked at the loss of her command.
I demand to know what's going on here. What happens in 67 heartbeats? And what right do we have to ransack the Koboloi chieftain's chambers? We are a diplomatic envoy, not a raiding party.
59 heartbeats, Eosh sneered. Kivan's silence spell is dampening the sound of our conflict in this chamber. In 53 heartbeats, it will expire, and the Koboloi in the Gulp Hall will hear any loud noise we make. We must act quickly.
That does not give us the right to make like petty thieves and rob the Koboloi's treasures.
Sidra counseled the group. It is the way of the lineman, Matna interjected while smashing open the footlocker. Sidra, your stupefying skills at diplomacy have revealed absolutely nothing about the missing merchant. If you hope to discover his fate, I suggest you stop your mincing, quietly grab whatever you think might provide a clue to the whereabouts of the lost merchant, and perhaps you may wish to heal the party, cleric. 47 heartbeats. Eosh motioned with a dismissive gesture and turned to unlock the chest. Sidra stewed for a moment longer, unyielding in regard for her command for the diplomatic mission. When Kivan spoke up, 37 heartbeats, she finally relented.
They all knew what they were doing. They were skillful and efficient and still alive after many months along the lineman.
She relented and joined the pillaging. Even so, to ease her conscience, she gathered only those things that she regarded as potential evidence. The purple sashes on the orc and chieftains. As she loosened the knots of each sash, smooth oval-shaped stones fell to the floor. She bagged both items. After Kivan motioned to the party to let them know that the sounds of the room now carried down the hallway, Matna moved to guard the entrance to the chamber, while Sidra led Kivan and Brajana to the back corner for healing. It didn't escape Sidra's notice that the rogue, alone among the Arcanists, emerged from the skirmish unscathed. While Sidra tended to the injured, Eosh continued to stuff goods into her side bags, sifting through items to find those that might fetch some gold from the mercantile cartels. After she finished with the storage goods in the corner of the room, she moved to the two chieftains' bodies. She reached down to dislodge the crowns from the dead kobolds' heads, when Matna sprinted to her and pushed her to the stone floor. Do not tear away the crown! What? The uncut gemstones may be the most valuable things in this forsaken coal mine, Eosh gingerly retorted, still lying on the floor at the feet of the man-beast. Footnote 14. Sidra noted,
I took great pleasure in seeing that the damnable rogue feared someone.
End footnote. What? The uncut gemstones may be the most valuable things in this forsaken coal mine, she gingerly retorted, still lying on the floor at the feet of the man-beast. No. Chieftains are replaceable. Crowns are sacred. We must leave behind what allows the Koboloi to worship new leaders, Matna warned her. Sidra's account then continues to describe their effort to escape the lair.
I was astonished to hear such a wise statement from the barbarian. It certainly put Eosh in her place. It also gave me an opportunity to retake command of the group. I asked for suggestions on how to escape before the whole lair discovered our crimes and assailed us in revenge for the death of their masters. None of the banquet horde disturbed us while we looted the chamber, so the group presumed that the Koboloi knew nothing of what had just transpired. While we discussed the possibility of simply walking out, Kivan then happened upon a plan.
The crates and carts along the wall of the banquet hall, near the exit to the main hall, might prove to be an excellent diversion. If we caused a blaze to erupt there, it would block the clan from overtaking us from behind and attract the guards at the front entrance to come to the aid of their offspring.
I welcomed his idea, believing the flue of the fire pit would permit the smoke of the flames to escape so that none of the young Koboloi suffered an infernal death. The other members agreed we had no other choice, so Brajana was shaped into her normal Hibbifu form and cleaned the blood of the Koboloi guards from her face. Eosh grabbed the torch from the sconce along the wall. while Kevon filled a small leather pouch from one of the dead guards with lantern oil from his pack. I grabbed my crossbow from the floor of the chamber and quickly rifled through the wares that the gem-minded thief tossed aside during her greedy search. I collected a dark purple robe, the same color as the sashes, and 2 more oval-shaped stones with pinched corners that reminded me of the shape of an eye in its socket.
With those final notes, Sidra's report on her diplomatic venture to the kobold's lair comes to a close. Presumably, their escape plan worked to perfection. And this concludes Chapter 6 of Arcane Cage.